Welcome everybody to this episode of our AIM Learn Fast webinars. Got a pretty exciting episode today. This is our second one in 2021. We're going to be talking about engineering the driver, and while we're not going to get a ton into the actual, AIM data and working it, we're going to build on one where we did do that a few weeks ago with our co-host today, Matt Romanowski, where he talked about looking at the data and looking at heart rates and some other things. And what we really talked about during that one was, and we mentioned that we were going to have a special guest come on that knows this subject extremely well. And that is our guest today, who's going to be, we'll introduce him a little deeper in a moment, Dr. David Ferguson. And what we're going to talk about more is just the bigger picture of how does all this work, and we will look at a couple of data slides and take a little bit of a look. But I'd like to go ahead and just get started. This one's going to be a little bit different. There's three of us today. It is a subject of very little knowledge from me, so I am going to pull back quite a bit and ask the dumb questions every once in a while, as I'm good at. But Matt's going to co-host with me, and then and Dr. David Ferguson's going to chat about some of the specifics. A pretty exciting day for us here. He's well known in this industry and has done a lot of work and has a lot of knowledge, so it'll be pretty fun. So let's jump into just some quick introductions. Matt has been here, this is his ninth time co-hosting as one of our webinar co-hosts. Been around for quite some time with us, and of course he's out there doing a lot of stuff as an AIM dealer, does the seminars and online sales, and is a working data acquisition guy, and mainly or a big part of Trans Am and some other series where he spends a lot of time. So we'll come back to Matt here in just a moment, but let's not. Matt, anything else that you can add? Maybe a little bit of what we're going to do here a little bit differently, and then we'll introduce the doctor.
Yeah. So real quick is kind of the way I started with the heart rate stuff. Was I had a fitness journey, lost a bunch of weight, improved my general fitness, and I started logging my heart rate in the car. And I thought it was pretty neat. And then as I started to try to learn more, I found Dr. Ferguson online, and sort of the opposite of a story he's going to tell probably is I shot him an email and just said, hey, I have this stuff. I don't know what all of it means. What do you think? And he got back to me, and we started emailing back and forth, and still share some data and all that kind of stuff. And the previous seminar where I shared my data and kind of my interpretation, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not the real expert in the analysis of it. I can collect it. So Dr. Ferguson's here to do that part.
Perfect. Let's bring up his slide, and let's just a little bit about Dr. Ferguson. You're the director, I believe, it was the title I saw, Spartan Motorsports Performance Lab. Yep. And I'll just jump to the racing side and let you get back into the details of the rest of it. But you've worked in NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, to increase performance and safety of drivers and crew members. It's the first time being here. Thank you for joining us, Dr. David Ferguson, and appreciate you being here. Give us a little bit more background on you and where we're going to kind of go today.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, obviously, Roger and Matt, of course, AIM, thank you very much for having me here. I thought I'd kind of, I'm a doctor, but I'm a PhD. I'm not an MD, so I don't give shots and fix bones. So I'm a researcher, and particularly I'm a professor of exercise physiology. And that might sound kind of like a funky name, but really think of me as a mechanical engineer for the human body. So I'm going to look at the stresses placed on the body, and I'm going to find ways to make it stronger and more efficient. My training comes from, I did my PhD at Texas A&M University. So I saw some howdies and people from Texas. Howdy, I miss Texas, so hopefully I can get back there one day. And then from Texas A&M, I went on to Baylor College of Medicine and did a postdoctoral fellowship in cardiovascular physiology. And we're going to talk a lot about cardiac stuff a little bit later here. So that's kind of my training. And as we get into this, we'll talk a little bit about what we do. But I've basically taken sports science, sports performance, human performance, whatever you want to call it, and I've translated that to motorsports. And it might surprise you that there's not a whole lot on motorsport physiology. So since about 1962, there's probably been about 30 research articles ever written on it. And give you a comparison, there's about 400 articles written a year on football. So not a whole lot of information out there, and some of the information we'll share today will probably be pretty enlightening, and I'm pretty sure all of your guests here could apply that and put it to good use.
Exactly what we were after. As we've kind of chatted leading into this, you work on the professional level, you work on the amateur level, you work at a bunch of different levels, and we were talking about who is our group here, but I think it's important to also talk about the some of the stuff you've done on the professional level, because it's the exact same thing, right? You're doing the exact same thing and applying this information at no matter what level that you are in motorsports. So
yeah, absolutely. I'll give you kind of the path that happened. I was, I kind of started in NASCAR. I started with kind of Stuart Haas Racing and Hendrick Motorsports. We lost up with their pit crews and trying to make the pit crews perform better. And then I ended up transitioning over to IndyCar to work with Charlie Kimball, who's a type 1 diabetic, and we developed a lot of his glucose monitoring for performance. And kind of that's where it all started, of human physiology data merged with car data, which we'll talk a lot about today. And then that eventually led into working in Formula One. And now it's kind of come full circle. We've worked with the big teams, and we've realized that actually the grassroots guys need this information too. So that's how I've kind of come back, and we're doing a lot of IMSA, SCCA stuff. And so I think that's primarily your audience in here, which I'm looking forward to getting our questions actually.
Perfect. Matt, I'm gonna turn it back over to you. Matt's gonna handle, for the most part, things we're gonna talk about, but I'm gonna go to the first slide, Matt, and you go ahead and fill in the little bit of the blanks of where you think we are with our discussion this morning, and then we will go ahead and get started with David's presentation.
Yeah, and I think a great way for that is Dr. Ferguson brought up working with Charlie Kimball, and as I've done these the heart rate monitoring and some of the biofeedback kind of stuff with it, it's been very interesting to me how many people are type 1 and type 2 diabetics that drive. It's a pretty significant portion of the people that we have driving, and they're often kind of either surprised that there's ways to monitor some of this, or they don't realize kind of how important it was. And I think Dr. Ferguson's story of how he started with Charlie is a really good kind of intro to where some of these pictures come from and how it started.
And I'll jump in one more time before we go. I went and did a little bit of just looking around on your website, Dr. Ferguson, and there was a couple things that jumped out at me. Maybe you can just sneak them in here as you talk about some different things. Some of your research assistants that have been looking into things. Number one was the difference between male and female in motorsports was what seemed to be a focus. Yep. And that one made some sense to me, and lots of good information there. The other one, though, that I hadn't thought about was dyslexia and race car drivers and people in motorsports. And maybe you sneak that in here and talk about why that what you found, and just the headlines that I was reading, it was a different result than I thought I might see. So maybe you sneak that in as we talk a little bit here. So
sure. So yeah, absolutely. So I'll start big, and I'll get to Matt's question right here. So what we see here are some pictures from my lab with my students. So as Roger said, I'm director of the Spartan Motorsport Performance Lab at Michigan State University. And our job is really to understand the physical stress on drivers and then make them perform better and make them safe. And you can kind of think of it as, we are looking for big areas that we need to address in order to dictate policy to make things better. And so we'll start with the picture on the bottom right there. There's myself and three of my great students that worked with me, Alex, Peter, and Montana. And we're standing in the garages at the Indianapolis 500. You can see the Charlie Kimball's IndyCar sitting right there. So Matt said that there are a lot of drivers out there that are type 1, type 2 diabetics. So type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes basically means that there's an inability to get glucose from your bloodstream into your muscles. And this might sound a little complicated, so we'll keep it very superficial, but basically glucose is just as important as oxygen. It goes into your muscles, goes into your brain. It allows you to function and operate appropriately. Now, diabetics have lived this for decades and trying to manage it and whatnot. So Charlie kind of first came on the scene to me about 11 years ago. That's when we've been working together. And, you know, he was not the first type 1 diabetic to compete, but he was the first one to really publicly talk about it. Now, as an exercise physiologist, glucose is really interesting because glucose is, like I said, just as important as oxygen. And when we start to really look at that, it can really dictate your performance. So we were looking at a couple different things, and he actually tracks his blood glucose in the car with him. So he wears a sensor that kind of goes right on his shoulder, and it sends his blood glucose level to the car's data system. It's all linked together. And what can happen is you can look at oil temperature, brake pressure, blood glucose, all that stuff integrated together. And, you know, I say I'm not an engineer, but I know just enough to get me in trouble, basically. And so I was really interested in trying to do analysis of blood glucose and driving performance variables. And so we did a process basically called a regression analysis where we tried to predict lap time based on blood glucose. And so the first thing I realized is that Charlie was never in any danger or any trouble due to blood glucose. He was always healthy. That was always taken care of. Our goal was, could we make him perform faster? And I think the story Matt wants me to get at is probably the second time Charlie came to visit me, I had done this analysis. And when I first saw him, I said, hey, Charlie, I think I know why you suck on ovals. And the reason was that, you know, from a, you know, integrated physiology perspective, blood glucose can influence blood flow parameters and vasoconstriction. And when you're on the big high G tracks, that can be more fatiguing. We're going to talk a lot about fatigue today. So that kind of started this process of, okay, could we optimize his blood glucose to improve car performance? And so we kind of, through various tactics, did that. And, you know, the very famous story I like to tell is we were able to find him an additional 4 seconds of performance. We made him 4 seconds faster. And the best part of the story I like to tell is that the same time we did that, he was with Ganassi at the time, and I think they invested something like $100,000 to pick up 1/10 of a second at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So if I, of course, translate that out like, well, you owe me $80 million.
Of course you translated it that way.
And, you know, which it's two separate things. Ours was across a whole race, and that was a lap. But basically, you know, I rub that in his face every time I see him. And, you know, kind of get to the topic you raised again, Roger. That really started this process for us where we said, let's find where drivers are fatiguing and let's reduce that fatigue. And so, you know, to get on the dyslexia topic, as you know, there's a variety of individuals out there that have dyslexia. It's about 10% of the population. However, about 30% of the population in racing are dyslexic. And so that can be for two reasons. One, you know, dyslexia, for those that you don't know, it's trouble with reading. A lot of times the words get flipped. So if the word is dog, D-O-G, your brain will flip that into God, G-O-D. And really what does that is a variety of reasons, but has to do with your eye tracking patterns, right? So why is it that there are more dyslexics in racing than in the general population? Well, it could be that they just haven't done well at school, so they go to, you know, more physical sports. And that's not entirely the case, because if you look at basketball, football, and baseball, about 10% of those individuals are dyslexic. So there's something going on there in racing. And the picture, the top right picture of us with the simulator, this is where we did this. We actually put eye trackers on dyslexics and non-dyslexic race car drivers. And dyslexics have altered eye movement pattern. And put it very simply, in a race car, a dyslexic will look at the exit of the corner, and then we'll look at the entrance, and they go back and forth. So they don't actually follow their eyes all the way through the corner. They look at the exit, jump to the entry, and then they go to the next corner. So if you now back that up and think about that, isn't that how you should look on the racetrack anyway? You should never look at where you are, but look at where you're going. So that skill set is something they don't have to learn, and it's something that they can kind of almost have an advantage when they're starting a bit. And there's been a variety of very famous dyslexic drivers. So we know that Justin Wilson in IndyCar was a big one. Another one many people don't know about is Sir Jackie Stewart from Formula One. So there are quite a large numbers there. And so to get to the last topic we did, which I always like to talk about because this is where I got 2 death threats, was the comparison of male and female drivers in racing. And, I think obviously there's a unique aspect to racing in that males and females compete alongside each other, right? Usually in other sports like soccer, you're going to have a female league and a male league. And it's kind of a thing of where there's always said, well, females are not that prevalent because they fatigue too much in the race car. And, you go back to Janet Guthrie when she entered the Indy 500, they said, get the tits out of the pits. It was kind of, always a thing that was talked about, and a lot of people dismissed it, some ignored it, but it was a common thing of why are females not more prevalent in racing? And the truth is that probably, I would say 5 years ago, they started to say, well, it's because they fatigue too much. They can't handle the physical stress of the race car. And now that's my area, right? So when we start talking about fatigue, maybe we'd better measure this. So we actually did that study. We compared male and female race car drivers. They either drove the exact same car in IMSA or drove a very similar car in open wheel in the feeder road Indy series, road IndyCar series. And what we found was, no, there's no difference between male and female drivers in terms of fatigue. Females can drive the race car just like everyone else. Here's the kicker, as long as they train for it, and as long as they practice, right? So as long as they just go through natural development and they train, they condition themselves to handle the stresses on the race car, they can do it absolutely fine. This study was kind of a hot button for us because obviously we were talking about some, kind of controversial topics. I got 2 emails. One's, basically addressing like, we hate that you're going to be bringing females into our racing league and we're going to get you, basically. I laughed it off. I probably should have been a little bit more concerned, but I was like, hey, maybe we're doing something that matters in terms of racing. So those are kind of the projects we've worked on now. Where we're going now is we're trying to develop new products to help drivers stay hydrated, stay safe, improve performance. And I probably talked way longer than you wanted me to on those topics. So I'll shut up now.
You got the third picture on here. You talked about the 2 of them. What about the third picture before we move on and get deeper into it?
Oh, sure. So the third picture, this is myself and Sam Barthel when he was in the lab. He is now the sports scientist for the Philadelphia 76ers. So that means I trained him well and he learned enough to go make more money than me. This is at the 24 Hours of Daytona where we had just finished working with the Wayne Taylor team when they were competing 2017. So we did this big study with Ed Potkanowicz, who I know Matt's talked to a lot and kind of chatted with, where we were looking at, okay, what goes on to the driver physiologically over a 24-hour race? And could we use this data to make them perform better in the race car and help them recover because they're getting 3 hours of sleep and then jumping right back into the race car? And I'll tell a little bit about some of the stuff that we did there when we go into some of these other slides. I knew Matt would like that one because we've talked about Wayne Taylor racing a couple times.
And you're going to get to a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah, we'll throw some more out there.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the next slide and you jump in and tell a little bit about what you do there. I think you might have already done that, but
yeah. So this is kind of a nice feeder of what we've kind of talked a little bit. I won't spend too much time on it, but basically this is more for your audience, really. I am a professor, and as the name implies, it basically means I can't make any profit off anything I do. I am here to help and here to educate, basically. So anything that I talk about now that you're interested in, that you want a little bit more information, feel free to go to my website. We've got good information up there about what's going on in the lab. Or you can check out our book. It's available on Amazon. It's The Science of Motorsport. And this book really focuses on the physical aspects of racing. So we talk about the physical stress, we talk about proper fitness, proper nutrition, proper ways to train. We get into a little bit of the medical aspect and try and give you some resources if you do get hurt in the car, what you should do, what you should think about. We have a kind of a life story from Charlie Kimball in there in the last story that, in the last chapter, excuse me, that talks about some of the things that we did to hopefully inspire you to seek out either myself or other professionals to try and get the benefits of what we have going on. And so really, this is just a way to reach out. If I can be of any help to any of you, I'm always happy to help and chat. And my goal is, I love racing so much. I don't want to see anyone get hurt anymore. I've seen enough of that. And so if I can help you stay safe on the track, here's some great resources, but also feel free to reach out anytime.
Pretty cool that you've been able to put two passions in your life together like this and make a career out of it. That's pretty cool. In the chat box, Robbie has linked the Performance Lab link there for everybody to go take a look at it. He's also linked so far, and there'll be lots more links as we go. He's also linked this presentation where you can grab this as a PDF, because there is some detailed information in here. Those of you that are watching this on YouTube later, all these links will be in the description box below. Okay, perfect. Let's jump to the next slide.
Yeah, so let's actually talk some physiology here. Let's talk about what's going on. So this figure is actually in the book. So if you get the book, you'll see this again here. And I love this phrase because you should all know this. Racing is physically stressful. And you should be tired and feel that you've done work when you get out of the race car. And if you don't, you're doing it wrong. So typically what happens is you're going to climb in the race car and your heart rate is going to go up. That's the red line that we see. Your breathing rate is also going to go up. That's the blue line. And then this kind of purple line, that's your blood glucose. Blood glucose is going to go up as well. That's all normal. That all has to happen. And all that's doing is that is delivering glucose and oxygen to your muscles and your brain so that you can think quickly and react quickly to pilot this vehicle on the track. So totally normal, totally supposed to happen. However, it is tiring and it can cause fatigue. So let's go to the next slide and we'll kind of talk about fatigue a bit.
A question for you on that slide. Is that the same as if a stick and ball sport, or somebody who's a basketball player, would that chart look the same, very similar, or totally different?
It would look very similar. I would say that depending on the type of sport, there might be more peaks and valleys. Like in a hockey sport, they're only on the ice for a couple of minutes, so heart rate will come back down. But active participation in the sport, it will look very, very similar, if not identical, right? So, kind of give you an idea, when you're in the race car, your heart rate is going to be about 60 to 80% your max heart rate. And your max heart rate, by the way, can be calculated simply by taking 220 minus your age. So if you're a 20-year-old individual, your max heart rate is going to be 200 beats per minute. And like I said, that's normal. You're going to try and deliver oxygenated blood to your working muscles. That's how oxygen and glucose allow your muscles to basically make energy so they can do work. And if you're going to be working in the race car, you'd better have more energy. So you try and do that a little bit more. It's also going to help you cool the body. So you're in this big fire suit, right? I don't need to explain the fire suit to your audience. You know exactly what that's like. And it's great. It's going to protect you in a fire. However, it's going to prevent sweat from evaporating and cooling yourself. And sweating is the best way to cool the body. And so my friends down in Texas probably know all about that pretty well. But if you have the fire suit on, that's going to be impaired. So you're going to sweat more, but it's not going to cool you. So you're going to lose, 4 to 7 pounds of sweat in probably like a 2.5 hour race. And that's continuous racing. So there's a lot of physical stress placed on you, but your body's going to respond to that. And it's going to adapt, but it is still going to be tiring. The other thing that I do want to kind of point out is another reason your heart rate goes up is due to the emotional arousal. You are pumped, you are excited. And in fact, my favorite thing is when you put an instrument, a driver, and you put them in the car and you turn that car on, heart rate goes up, right? It's just because you're excited. It's that adrenaline. It's going to happen, and that's okay. So all of this stuff is going to happen, and it's going to kind of, allow you to compete in this. However, just like, fuel in the gas tank, parts on a race car, that can cause wear and it can cause fatigue. So what do you say we jump to the next slide here and we can kind of talk about big stresses of fatigue? Or Matt looks like he's got an idea that he wants to chat about.
Well, I was thinking we have a couple questions that people ask is, what's a good way to stay hydrated? Because we're talking about all this fluid loss and, food to get the energy. Is it maybe we're all used to seeing things like Gatorade or snack bars? Like what's a good plan with some of those kind of things?
Yeah. So when we get to the actual race, so a race nutrition and hydration plan, it can be summed up pretty simply. Food wise, you want simple carbohydrates. Okay, simple and easily to digest carbohydrates. So that's your Gatorades, right? Some people will just use like straight fruit. That's pretty good to get access to. So very simple carbohydrates and easy on your stomach. You don't want to try anything new the day of the race, okay? Now, you can back that out a bit and have more kind of complex meals the day before, the week before, but when you're about to get in the race car, if you want to try and refuel yourself, simple carbohydrates, Gatorade is great. There's, kind of like bars now that you can break off that have set amounts of glucose that are really nice to use. In terms of hydration, you're going to want to stay on top of that because that's going to be the primary threat to your fatigue is losing the sweat and becoming dehydrated is going to be the primary reason why you fatigue and you have performance detriment, okay? So really you should plan to drink about 1.5 to 3.5 liters of fluid to accommodate for this. And that's over the course of the race day, all right? So let's, I'm gonna speak to you like a physiologist and then I'm gonna give you the take-home message that I always like, right? So basically, probably when you get to the racetrack, so let's say you show up at the racetrack at 7 a.m. Your race doesn't start till noon. So you've got a couple hours. I would make sure you're hydrated, and there's two ways to make sure you're hydrated. One is you can drink 10 milliliters of water per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so if you are 70 kilograms, so like 150 pounds, you're going to drink 700 milliliters of water. Now, those of you that are doing the math right now, here's an easier way to remember it. Your urine should be clear to pale yellow. So, when you go to the bathroom, you want your urine to be pretty clear. That means you're hydrated, all right? Not to get too gross, but I'm a physiologist, so we just have to talk about body stuff. But typically when you wake up in the morning, your urine is, pretty yellow, pretty dark. That's normal. That's just a part of sleeping. That's metabolism. Throughout the day at a racetrack, you don't want that. If you see that, we need to fix that. So it should be clear to pale yellow. Here's another important piece of information, Matt, is you cannot you can't really overkill on prehydration. So just because you do that at the start of the day, you need to continually drink, right? So I'm a big fan of saying, before you get in the car, drink 150 milliliters of water. If you have an in-car drinking system, that's great. Try and take about 3 mouthfuls on the straightaway or something like that. So just a continuous thing. You will sweat. You will flush it out. It will be great. I saw a quick chat pop up of I saw Gatorade and coconut water. Couldn't fully read it. If you can read that to me, Matt, I can probably address it.
Yeah, so it's Brick he's been on the seminar. He's an AIM guy and amateur driver going for F1, I think. He asked Gatorade versus coconut water. He said he usually prefers the coconut water because it has less sugar than the Gatorade, but it still has the good electrolytes.
Yep. So this is a really important question. And again, I'm going to talk with a physiologist. So Roger, Matt, tell me to shut up if I get too crazy.
Well, let me give you a little more fuel for this one.
Okay.
Ray also asked a question about some drivers like to drink the energy drinks, the Monsters, the Red Bulls. I've also heard there's a lot of them that do espresso and different coffee drinks before. So how do all these play in? Because caffeine's a diuretic. It makes your hydration seem to go down.
Okay. All right. Roger's going to hate me because I'm going to try and stay on time now because I could talk for like 3 hours. Okay. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of the scientific literature. Okay. So actual research studies that have been done with quantifiable data, right? Now, if there might be some things that haven't been tested, I'm not going to really answer those because we don't know the data, but I'm going to try and get at this pretty carefully. So in terms of hydration, if you are running a race that is 45 minutes or less, any fluid is going to be good. You're not going to lose the major electrolytes that you lose in a 2 to 4 hour racing event, which would warrant the Gatorades, the coconut waters, the electrolyte stuff. Okay. So if you're, kind of a weekend warrior and you're going to run maybe 2 or 3 races that are 45 minutes in length over 3 days, any fluid is fine. Drink the one that tastes the best for you. Okay. And just monitor your urine. Okay. Now, let's say you're going to run the longer ones and someone asked a very important question about electrolytes and sugar, and if you should have sugar in it or not. So your gut, okay, it absorbs all your nutrients, right? In order to efficiently absorb all the electrolytes you take in, you need a little bit of sugar, okay? And really it's about, it's a very, very small portion. Regular Gatorade has about 15 times the sugar you actually need, okay? If you ever go taste the original Gatorade, you will spit it out because it is not sweet at all. The original stuff that was developed at University of Florida doesn't have the sugar in it. A major soda company bought Gatorade. We're just going to leave it at that, right? So if you, Chris, it was nasty. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. So here's the thing. When you're doing physical activity and racing and competing, the sugar's fine. That you need a little bit to get the electrolytes in. Plus, it's going to help refuel your muscles to actually contract and do all that stuff. So what I recommend is if you're going to have these long races, drink something that tastes good to you. If it's coconut water, absolutely fine. If it's Gatorade, absolutely fine. You can also cut Gatorade down. You can mix half with a little bit extra water if you don't want all the sugar because you don't need it. But the important thing is to get the fluid actually in you. And if you're competing at this much for 2 to 3 hours in a hot environment, the sugar is not going to hurt you. In terms of the energy drinks, we're getting a little bit more into who's sponsoring who now, and you're almost required to drink that stuff, for other reasons. So caffeine is a diuretic. If you drink caffeine ahead of time, you will probably dehydrate yourself a little bit. The other thing that you do have to acknowledge with caffeine is it does allow for some mental acuity switch. So there are some people that will drink caffeine and they kind of, I can focus. That will help a little bit. The literature does show that caffeine can kind of prime you and help you be a little bit more performed. There haven't been a lot of studies done on the energy drinks. There are a few that have shown there's increases in blood pressure, and that can be detrimental when we get to talk about blood flow to your working muscles and how that can induce fatigue. So, all right, so I've talked like a physiologist. Roger is watching the clock. Big take-home message is you're going to sweat, drink fluid, keep your urine clear. I say drink something that you're willing to drink a lot of so you can stay hydrated. If the race is less than 45 minutes, it can be anything. It can be water. If you're going to be a little bit longer than that, you definitely want to get some calories in with some sugars, and that's okay. That's Gatorades. That's coconut water. You can cut the Gatorade down with water itself if you want to, or I saw there's like Gatorade lights or Gatorade zeros.
And a question that kind of goes into this a little bit too, and I'm going to change how he asked a little bit. I think it's Bjorn, and he asked about the studies that show that your brain has like 100 millisecond latency. And he asked specifically if you ever studied it, but maybe in a context of kind of how we're looking at things is, does the hydration and some of these other drinks affect that?
I love neck up questions because I'm a neck down physiologist. All right, so let's, so when we talk, so we're talking about reaction time, basically is what we're getting at.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the best way to think about this is, I'm sure all of us on here have had a headache caused by dehydration, okay? And you know that, some people call that a hangover, whatever you want to call it, but we've all probably experienced something like that, right? When you're dehydrated, yes, your reaction time slows, right? So if you're dehydrated, reaction time slows, but more importantly, your response accuracy gets worse. So not only is your reaction time slowed, but when you have to make a decision, you're going to make the wrong decision. Now, you know, that could be me trying to text Matt on my phone and I spell a word wrong. At 200 miles an hour, that might be a bigger mistake than me sending Matt a wrong message. Caffeine does improve reaction time. It does raise that speed of making a decision. I am, and maybe I think it was Bjorn that asked the question, he might be a little bit more familiar with it. I am not sure if the data is conclusive on response accuracy yet, but again, I'm not a neck up physiologist. And if you want, I can take a dig into that. I can shoot that over to Roger and maybe he can post that later with other stuff.
Sure. And two questions that came up from different people is that, you know, we speak about, and it's one of Dr. Ed's big things, is the urine chart and how much you need to drink. And it's a reference that's in your book that I found. It was really interesting because we have all this complex medical data and studies, and it comes down to urine color. With that, what happens for the folks that say they drink water? Somebody, Kyle here, says he drinks 6 to 9 bottles on a summer day, still doesn't have to urinate in the day. So is that he needs to drink more or his body's different?
That's a hard question to answer because, you know, if you're drinking that much water and not going to the bathroom, there could be other stuff going on there. And I would say probably go to a physician and just get checked out real quick. There could be, you know, some other ways to address that to make that a little bit easier. And maybe you need to drink more. That's a hard one for me to answer because I don't have all the information. That's a difficult one for me to get at, Matt. But I would say, you know, if you're drinking a lot and not really going to the bathroom still, maybe get checked out for other issues. All
right. And I think it's sort of your answer there is one of my favorite data things is sometimes it depends.
Yes. Oh, the answer to physiology is always it depends. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if we want to jump in the next one so we can kind of get through all this material. We've had some really great questions here.
Yeah, these are great. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. All right, yeah, let's jump to the next slide. I think we kind of addressed this a bit of, you know, what to drink and how to drink and whatnot.
So this is one that I threw in on you. You hadn't seen this, but I had certainly mentioned it. One of the drivers that we see that has a great social media presence, and he posts about his physical training a lot, is Jordan Taylor. Yep. So I saw this the other day in his Instagram feed that this is what he did in one day. And I saw this weekend he did another triathlon. And I was talking about this to someone, and this is almost a triathlon. I think it's short on the run. So he biked 30 miles, did 100 pull-ups, did 200 push-ups, a 1,500 meter swim, and a 5-mile run. That's a huge workout. Is he an exception of the top level IMSA and drivers all over? And is he average, or this to me seems really extreme?
So I would say that when you talk about the top tier elite guys, they're doing something very similar to this. They might not be doing this all in one day, but I would say they're dedicating as much time and effort to do this work right here, right? And the reason is I'm going to give you a Navy story, okay? So, you know, with racing and, you know, aeronautics, there's a lot of parallels, right? So we know that, I guess, Tom Cruise has a new Top Gun movie coming out soon at some point, right? And so everyone knows Top Gun, you know, the Navy's elite fighter squadron school. And one of the things that they always teach you is you want to be able to engage in a dogfight by pulling less G's, being more efficient so the stress isn't on you as much, right? That's basically what Jordan is doing here and what all the other guys are doing. They are trying to raise their fitness to a level so that when they throw the car into a high G, high hot day where the car is exerting a lot of forces on them, they're being more efficient and not fatiguing. And I would say that what he's doing is on par with what the top guys in F1, IndyCar, IMSA are doing.
All right. Because I know, you know, he's got the 30-mile bike ride. Another guy who posts a lot about it is Tony Kanaan. He's a major bike rider and a major, he's a super fitness guy. And we talked about it in the other one, his work with NTT and the shirts. And, you know, they tracked back, they thought he had a strength problem, but it was actually that he had such a death grip on the steering wheel that he was wearing himself out, not that he wasn't fit.
Well, the thing, oh yeah, I mean, Tony Kanaan is fitness, right? I mean, the way he watches a movie is he puts a weight plate on his head and does a plank so he can build his neck strength, and halfway through the movie he switches to the other side. So that, you know, I mean, this is what these guys do. It's all, they're, as James Hinscliffe always tells me, they're just wired different.
So I gave us a little bit of an aside here, but this goes to kind of where the previous webinar was and where we're headed. So can we use heart rate to determine fatigue and everything on the track? Like, what does this tell us that we gather this heart rate? Where do we go with it?
So absolutely. And so let's think of it this way, right? So the heart's main job is to get blood, oxygen, nutrients to the working muscles. And it's kind of the, you know, if you think about it, kind of the fuel pump for the car in a way, right? And, you know, you can look at all aspects of how the heart contracts, it's kind of its biochemical properties, and it can tell you signs of fatigue, right? And so why don't we go to the next slide here? It might be easier to speak with a picture, right? So, you know, this is an EKG or an ECG tracing, depending on what side of the world you're on. And, you know, we've probably all seen this on doctor TV shows and movies that, you know, that do, do, do. And those big peaks, those big red lines are called R waves, okay? Now, the time between R waves is called the R to R interval, right? And so you can kind of see, this is a nice cartoon. We have one is 828 milliseconds, there's 845 milliseconds. And when you kind of compare the intervals across a couple of minutes, that's your heart rate variability. So the variation in between your heartbeats, basically, right? And so let's go to the next slide, Matt, and we can kind of talk about this. So again, coming back to the Navy and the Air Force, they really did a lot of work on this, trying to understand what this variability means, okay? And so I don't think there's too many physicians or cardiovascular physiologists on here, so we'll just skip the physiology lecture, but if they want more detail, we can certainly talk about it. But basically what the military found was they were very interested in trying to reduce the fatigue of their warfighters, right? Because obviously if they fatigue, it's far worse than if we fatigue in our race cars, right? And through this kind of this big data analysis, they found that if you had more variability, right? So more heart rate variability, you were more relaxed. If you had a lower HRV, you were more stressed, okay? So more variability is being more relaxed. Kind of think of it as you have more amplitude to do a task, right? You can generate more work, basically. A lower HRV, more stress. So let's go. I think we got the next slide here, Matt. Let's use an example here. Okay. So I love this picture because it's, I look at it as a physiologist, Roger and Matt look at it and go, what the heck is this? Right. And I'm like,
broken sensor, right? No.
Right. It's a little noisy here.
Well, so Roger, I'm going to tell a story that I really appreciate from you. Was you're like, I think you've got a lot of artifact in driver 2 here, Ferguson. Like, I think you've got a broken sensor. I'm like, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a graph over time, and we've basically graphed HRV on heart noise. I like Bruce. I like that. So remember, we want a high HRV because that's more relaxed and thus less fatigue. So that high HRV is going to be the big swings, right? And so we see that in driver 2. Driver 1 is pretty steady. There's a little bit there, but it's a pretty steady line. So let's talk a little about what we're looking at here. These are 2 drivers. They drove the same car at Laguna Seca. Okay. Tires were fine. There was no tire day, nothing like that, right? The big difference was that driver 1 in their development very early on, they raced at Laguna Seca, dropped a wheel, broke the wheel, and then the car kind of spun. And if you kind of think about, this was turn 6, you kind of think about where that's laid up, shot kind of across the track through the dirt, pretty traumatizing, right? And had a fear of this, was stressed out about it. And so stressed, fatigued, slower on track, right? So this is kind of a physiology graph. I think we might be able to look at this in more of a traditional racing layout, which might be a little bit more helpful to your audience. If you want to go to the next slide, Matt, or I'm happy to kind of discuss this a bit here, right?
Well, and I think another tie-in for this is that the wearable that so many of us, I don't have mine on right now, that you wear in your watch that has that stress reading.
Yeah, that's the same thing.
Same exact measure. And because I'm lucky today, I don't have to type in the chat box. The question that you gave me over this as you were talking is, in a chart like that, would you be able to see tire degradation as the car goes away? Do you see the driver's stress levels change?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk on the end a little bit about what to do when you see heart rate variability doing different things, right? So, and I'll give a teaser, but basically, if HRV is, like that really tiny line, the whole race, you're probably mentally stressed out about something that needs to be addressed. But if you see HRV starting big and it kind of starts to go away a bit, that could be you're probably fighting the car a bit, right? So in terms of dealing with this stuff and what it means to the car data, this is a pretty simple data trace with corner speed, throttle position, and brake pressure, basically, right? So this should all be something that everyone's seen, has a little bit to do with. And I think, Roger and Matt kind of joked about, we look at this from 3 different ways, right? So I'll tell you what this is. This is a driver. We're comparing 2 laps. It's exactly what Matt is talking about, right? What happens over the course of a race? So same driver, the colored lines are at the start of a run when tire temperature is up and good. The white lines are at the end of a race. Tires are still good. They haven't fallen off. They put new tires on. But this is a driver whose HRV has gone down. They're more fatigued. Did not drink in a 2-hour race. And so I can tell you lost about 7 pounds of sweat. So what do you guys see? Because you guys are the data guys that look at this stuff all the time, and I can kind of tell you what I see.
What I see, what I first saw in this when you first handed it to me, of course, we always look at the speed trace, right, for consistencies. And I noticed pretty quickly that the white data trace that was just a little bit off, all mid corners, right? Maybe trying harder, but off. And then, of course, there's a big difference here at the end, right?
Yep.
That's what I saw when I first saw it.
Same thing here. And I noticed in the throttle trace and how much later they were jumping to throttle everywhere. And how they didn't have that same commitment.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much exactly what happened. We have a driver who has become dehydrated, reaction time is slowed, they are fatigued, but they're still trying to push the car harder. So the first thing they're trying to do is they're trying to brake later into the corner by going on a lot harder brake pressure. And you can kind of see with the white lines peeking up. See, Roger, I'm not a data engineer guy. I didn't set the y-axis appropriately for that, so I apologize.
That's okay.
But then, we have to go back to throttle, right? But reaction time is slowed. We're not coming back to throttle that quickly. That could be slow reaction time. It could also be, I've gotten the car in a position it shouldn't be, and I'm trying to, get it back before I can go back to throttle, right? And then what happens is it all kind of falls apart at the end, right? If you do this long enough, you're just going to botch a corner, right? And I mean, Roger and Matt, you guys look at this all the time. If you saw a corner speed tracing like that, what would you tell the driver?
I don't know if Roger wants to start or.
I'm the guest. I should have answered.
Yes, no. This is great because I look at this and I see. If I had a guess, if you just showed this to me, I'd say it was two different drivers because it's so different. I think in a blind, if it was just presented, you said, what do you tell these two people? I would approach it very different than a worn out driver. And I wouldn't have guessed this was the same person hours apart.
Yep. And even if it's not, there's one driver that is being super aggressive and it's not paying off. It's right. You're trying too hard and you're actually going slower. That is what I would see. And is that because of fatigue or from not enough liquids or whatever? But that's what I see real quickly. You're trying too hard and eventually it bit him. Right.
Exactly. And that's we told this story backwards, right? So the reason I was brought into this was that, this was on a vehicle that had new tires. It was fine. It was performing well. Everything about the car should be performing well. And the driver is experienced. It's not, a novice driver. This is an experienced driver and, botched it, right? I mean, and so, when they started addressing it, it was, well, the car's fine. The driver needs some assistance, and that's how I got brought into it. And so I was like, let's start looking at this stuff. Let's start looking at HRV and hydration. Let's look at the data traces. And it became really clear, very apparent that, you didn't drink in 2 hours, and inside that cockpit is 140 degrees. And you get out and you think you're asking for water, but really what you're saying is, okay, we need to address something. And that gets to an important point here is that even the best drivers sometimes don't incorporate fluid and nutrition into their plan because they don't want to upset their racecraft, right? But I'll go back to Roger and Matt. If you saw this corner race, you'd say your racecraft was pretty upset there, right? So that's, that's kind of, everyone's, I always love this. There's so much engineering and effort that goes into perfecting the car. Not a whole lot goes into engineering the driver, but they're the ones that do this stuff, So that's this is where I come into play. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. But we can also talk about some tips to make this better. Or if Matt and Roger, you want to kind of quiz me a bit here.
Well, I think Tim has a great question that ties in here. And you mentioned the cockpit temperatures being really hot. And at the top level, they have some rules regarding that on how hot the cockpit can be. And there's changes and there was AC systems and now some of them are out. Some teams choose not to use them, which to me was very surprising when I saw that. And Tim asks about a lot of the cooling systems for drivers that people use that maybe after 15, there's a thought that they stop working after 15 to 20 minutes because you adjust to that temperature versus the people that cycle it on and off. So the folks that have a cool system, whether it's the suit, the AC, whatever it is, what's a good suggestion to use from that? And I guess the other one that I found very interesting, and maybe as an easier question, do you adjust to that cool garment?
So this is a hard question to answer because I upset a lot of people with the answer, and I'll answer it. So The cockpit temperature regulation, I actually played a part in that, in developing that and doing that stuff. So we can talk a little bit about that. For a cooling system, okay, the most common one is the cool shirt. That's the ventilated webbing, and there's a water circulation system. The minute that the water basically becomes the temperature of your skin, that system fails. And when I say failure, I mean it's no longer cooling you. So failure from a point of it doing its job. My data that I've collected indicates that unless you've got a really good cooler system that can really cool it down, it's only good for races less than 30 minutes. And I think that gets to the point that was made. I do not recommend to drivers to do a cool system for two reasons. One, the majority of my drivers race in longer races, but also if those systems fail and there is no water circulation and that just sits there on you, that becomes a heat sink and will actually raise your core temperature faster.
Yikes.
And that's dangerous. That's more dangerous. We did a lot of work with Corvette Racing on their cockpit temperature system and their air conditioner system. A great setup is if you have a sealed cockpit that you can cool that cockpit down, that is a great heat dissipation system. I really like it. And when you couple that with hydration, that's very effective.
Actually, that was a point I was going to make. We are getting closer on time, but I have seen, and it's in my mind right now because the Dakar Rally is going right now. And as I follow that, I'm just a huge fan of endurance racing and then off-road racing both. And that's the two of them put together, right? Those guys are going like 500 miles sessions every day for like 12 days. And I noticed 4 or 5 years ago, and it was the first one I saw. I don't follow it terribly closely, but Robbie Gordon was putting together a Dakar vehicle, and he sealed it and he put in air conditioning. It literally had air conditioning in the car. He gave up the weight because of number one, the dust, and of more importantly, the cooling, and then being able to drink while they are driving. And at first I was thinking, okay, that's just a comfort thing. Make sure you get, but in reality, it is fatigue and it is long term, and you got to be as good on day 11 and 12 at 100 miles an hour going across the desert as you are on day one. Interesting topic about the sealing and cooling of the car versus a suit.
And
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, man.
David asked a really good question that's like paddock wisdom. Light colored helmet and driver suit versus a dark colored. Has there been any studies or any anecdotal things that it matters?
Especially in open wheel cars where it's
yeah. So no, there have not been any studies. I've had such a good story. I'm trying to think if I can tell it. Okay. So typically, we do know that basic thermal properties of lighter and darker colors will influence performance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to answer the helmet question in a slightly vague way to get to the question. There is a very prominent team in open wheel racing that is very successful. And if you go look at the colors of all their driver helmets, they are all light. I'm just going to end it like that. Does that work?
I think the suggestion of observation is probably a great one.
Yeah, and let's put it this way. If someone did driver physiology and someone instrumented those drivers, that someone would probably see that there was a cooling effect of not wearing dark helmets. But I will acknowledge the one person that made the shout out to Dale Earnhardt of the black car, that there are exceptions to every rule, because I would never speak ill of the great Dale Earnhardt.
And I think Kyle actually had the other great answer to that, was that he was such a cool cat. He was like no one else.
Exactly. So we have to, that's probably no one else is as cool as him. So they have to wear the lighter.
Perfect. Let's
Very
jump
good.
on to the next slide, and let's talk kind of close it all down.
Yeah.
Close it all up. Solutions. Points of advice.
Yeah. So absolutely. So obviously, what we've kind of talked about here is using data to inform your performance from fitness and nutrition. So we talked about nutrition, specifically race day stuff, where if you have some glucose, make sure you stay hydrated, keep your urine clear, you'll stay hydrated. In terms of fitness, you should be exercising. So think about this. If in the race car, your heart rate is 150 to 170 beats per minute, why don't you train for that during the week? So put a heart monitor on, go for a run, go for a cycle, and actually exercise at the heart rate that you compete at. You'll probably become more efficient. And if you're more efficient, you will fatigue less. And if you're fatiguing less, you can probably push the car harder and make more appropriate decisions at the right time. Tracking your HRV is great, because if you see it, progressively getting worse, then you got to do something from a fitness nutrition standpoint. If your HRV is high the whole time, that's probably related to a mental fatigue. And you might want to investigate that. And a great way to do that is with a driver coach to kind of break down what's going on, to maybe give you some tools to relax in the car. And I know Matt talks about this a lot, is please breathe in the race car. You do not hold your breath the whole time. And I want to be really mindful of your time, Roger, but if I'm happy to expand on that if you allow it, would like it. But I'm also happy for your audience to reach out to me at any time about this stuff.
Yeah, I think the next slide talks about your book, the book that you mentioned earlier, and there's lots of details in there. The other thing that Matt did go into some detail. Maybe we bring you back for a part 2, in a few months or something. But the other one was, and maybe our link master can put that into the chat box. Matt, a couple weeks ago, we did kind of an earlier version of this, kind of leading into this, where we actually talked about the hardware and actually looked at some data traces inside of AIM of HRV and the thing that you talked about with Matt just a minute ago, where he was holding his breath before he was actually going into braking zones, and it was he was able then to see it and then understand, and maybe you don't want to make the change, but it gave him the advantage of understanding what was going on. So we'll probably won't go into it deeply here, but I'd love to have you back. And I see a couple people in the notes saying, yeah, please come back and take it from here and take it to the next step.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to do a data breakdown with you guys. We can even take Matt's data and walk through it and talk about how to train him and set up a year training plan. We can do that. I'll make Matt work. We'll make Matt sweat.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go.
Sounds good to me. I'm up for it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to that next slide. Let's talk about the book. Like you say, you don't make a ton of profit on these things. This is all part of the process. But and it says edited by. I don't know exactly what we don't need to go into it a ton. But this the Science of Motorsports. I've seen this, the Science of Motorsport, and no S on that. I've seen a lot of other people talk about this book. There's a Facebook group on that I belong to that talks about motorsports books, and I mentioned you were going to be here today with some of those folks. They may be here watching as well, or watching this later. The book is there. A lot of what he talks about in detail, I did look at the index and some other things. I don't have the actual book, but a lot of everything he was talking about today, with tons of good examples of actual things that they've done, are in the book as well. There's where you can order it. There's Robbie just put a link up there as well of where you could find it on Amazon. So anything else you'd like to add about the book? Anything behind the scenes there?
No, I'll tell you about the edited version. So the reason it's edited is that there are chapters written by multiple individuals in there, and experts on it. So there's experts on nutrition, neck training. Charlie Kimball even wrote a chapter, which is very kind of him to do. But yeah, we give example meals to do over a race weekend. We give hydration strategies. So there's some good stuff in there. Please look at it. I'm always being asked to do a second edition, and I'd like to, get a couple years down the road before I do it. But that may happen sooner than later, because, I'm a workaholic, and that might happen.
There you go. When I was looking through some of the pages that Amazon shows you as I was looking at it, I did notice there was a lot of detail and a lot of planning and a lot of information that I think everybody here might be very interested in. So everybody, if you'd like to take a look at that, to dig in a little deeper and visit our friends at Amazon, right? That's where
it is,
where you get everything nowadays.
All that, it's a great book. It's not a book to sit down and necessarily read cover to cover, but the chapters in it, and mine's right there.
Yeah, there you go, Matt.
It's a great book as a reference, and as you want to try to improve some part of the driver, to have all that information. And then what I loved about it was every chapter has that list of references. So if you really want to dig down and get into things, the information's there for you.
Perfect. The let's kind of start winding it down. We'll kind of close with Matt and David mentioning a couple more things, but this one will be put under just like the rest of them. We'll take this, and within an hour or two, this will be up on YouTube. We're adding to 141 other videos that we already have out there. Love that we're able to do this and share with all of that. The chat questions and links that we put in the chat will be in the description, and all of the question and answer that Matt was reading off of and feeding into it. Some of them got answered in other ways. That will be a document within a couple of days and will be attached as a PDF in the description box as well below. So all of that information will be on the YouTube site with for MAME Sports. The customer support is what we do. Love having everybody here. Love seeing everybody at the tracks. It's that time of year where maybe you're not visiting the track too much. If you are at the track, look for us. We're at almost all of the big events. If not, give us a call if you have any questions. The next webinar we're going to talk about is virtual coaching. We're gonna take some of this technology where we're doing data work like we've talked about quite a bit, and we're gonna bring in a special guest, Dion von Moltke from Racers360.com, and he's going to grab somebody's data, and we're going to bring it up there. We're going to talk about virtual coaching, number one, the bigger picture, and some of the benefits and some of the things that maybe make it a little bit more of a struggle, and how we work around that, getting data moved around. And then we're gonna do some example of actual virtual coaching with Dion. He's gonna grab some data from somebody in a video file, and we're gonna look through a couple of laps and give some tips and show how virtual coaching actually works. So that'll be a very, very, very good time. Make sure you check back in with us a week from today, Tuesday, January 19th, at our normal time of 10 p.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So look forward to seeing everybody there. Some contact information. I know that we had quite a few questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. Some of them may or may not have got answered fully, but here's some contact information for, of course, myself, for anything you'd like to always get in touch with me about. There's Matt's contact information, and Dr. Ferguson, his contact information. I'm going to kind of move this around a little bit, let Matt chat a little bit, see if there's anything else he'd like to add as we're kind of closing this up, and give Dr. Ferguson the last word. Matt.
No, I'm really excited we got to do this today, that people enjoyed it a lot. I think it's such an easy way, as Dr. Ferguson pointed out, that we can improve ourselves to get far more gains than we can in doing these things to the car. I have to figure out how I can get somebody 4 seconds and $80 million, but something to work on.
80 million. So
let's make this really
the
clear.
Checks
right?
in the mail.
Thank you,
but
Matt.
No, I'm glad everybody tuned in. This was a really fun session for me, and I'm like everybody else. I can't wait to do the next one.
Perfect. Dr. Ferguson, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Oh, I'd just like to say thank you both, Roger and Matt. This was so much fun. It was the highlight of my day to get to do this and talk about it. And to your audience, I really appreciate the great questions. If I didn't answer you like a question, shoot me an email. I'm happy to respond. And also, if you'd ever want to visit the lab up in Michigan, you're more than welcome to come, get kind of fitness assessed and nutrition assessment, so we can kind of help you out in the car. I know travel's a little restricted right now, but it's also freezing in Michigan. So come in the summer.
A couple of reasons that may be want to be pushed down the calendar just a little bit.
Exactly.
I have really enjoyed this. We had a meeting or two leading into this. There was lots of information that we were able to share here today. The only thing I'm disappointed in is our hour is up. There was even more that I think we could have shared even at this level that for part one. So I really do look forward to having a part two down the road a piece. We'll start setting a date. We'll look way down into the future, and we've got the next month and a half or so of webinars already done. But maybe we look down the road and we do a second one. Everybody, let me know if that's something that's interesting to you. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. I appreciate it. This has been a great time. Look forward to seeing everybody on the next one a week from today. And everybody have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.